Hello, I'm Miles. I'm the game director of Dream Prison Wanderer. I almost said Paper Soul Theater out of habit, but that's not the current game that we're working on. And welcome to another Otyugra report. This is not a monthly one, as you can see, although it is February 2021 if you're wondering. This is instead a special video talking about 6 times we got something wrong in our newsletters about Dream Prison Wanderer. We have stopped our monthly videos at the moment because we essentially ran out of interesting things to talk about that have been happening as development has continued. Up until a couple months ago, it seemed like every month there was something interesting that was going on in my life or my co-director's life or somebody else's life who was working on the project, or just like something in development that was just novel or interesting to talk about, for better or for worse. And I think honestly for better. Development has very much smoothed out lately. It's been kind of monotonous, and I don't mean that in a bad way. As such, we actually haven't had much of a reason to make a video to talk to you guys about, hey, what's going on with us, because it's like, if you use your imagination, that's exactly it. And everything's honky-dory, everything's good. I'm really happy to report the fact that development is chugging along. That's really all I have to say about it. Okay, so on to the 6 times. The first one was in our first issue, which came out about 18 months ago, in which we introduced the game, and in doing so, we talked a lot about roguelites, and I made a claim while trying to justify why we're making this game on the platform and at the time that we're starting it on, to try to explain to people why a mystery dungeon, why on the 3DS. Historically, those have been very hit or miss. So it felt very much necessary to make a strong case in our defense as to why we're doing that. And I compared our game favorably to Etrian Mystery Dungeon, because Etrian Mystery Dungeon did not sell well, and it is far and wide the closest game to our game, next to Azura Dreams, which is a game that came out 22 years ago, so it's not a very good point of comparison as compared to Etrian Odyssey, which has so many similarities and only came out a few years ago on the same platform. And I didn't realize it at the time, but when I did a little bit more research later on, I found out that Etrian Odyssey actually had a couple things going against it that I didn't realize. So in some ways, my point was actually a little bit stronger than I thought, but in some ways it was way off the mark, and that's what I want to talk about. The claim that I made is that Etrian Mystery Dungeon did not sell very well for the main reason that it was a controversial series, and that there was a lot of people like myself who had played a different game in the series previously, and it felt like, this is not for me, or worse, that this is actually just a bad game, and I'm just not interested in this, because it's frustrating or what have you. And I figured that there's enough people like that who, and just enough apathy by word of mouth or just a lack thereof, that the reason the game didn't sell well was because people just weren't into that franchise, and that just brought the game down. But what I didn't consider at the time is games that aren't Pokemon related and are Mystery Dungeon and are in the West have a really uphill battle, because Pokemon had the advantage of the tagline, which I even showed in my first newsletter, which was, imagine you've been turned into a Pokemon, go. The very novel and interesting idea. It's like, you've played with these cuddly creatures before, you've seen them on TV, but now you get to experience being a Pokemon, and that was just so awesome for people my age when we were growing up and we were told this tagline, and we really wanted the game, and we were really hooked on this series because of that. And I think no other Mystery Dungeon franchise by Chunsoft or otherwise have had anything anywhere near as powerful as that tagline to really get us interested. And I think I was trying to justify our game for all the wrong reasons. To be honest with you, we're a new company, we don't have a history for the most part. It's difficult for people to trust us as such. So it's only natural in some ways that our game, to be honest, is not going to do better than Etrian Mystery Dungeon. And I shouldn't have been so cocky about the fact that it kind of felt like it would have. But what our game does have is that it has an interesting premise of its own, whereas Etrian Mystery Dungeon just kind of felt like a it's a fun game, having finally played it myself, but it's not a very interesting game. I like its fantasy setting. Its story is minimum, but it's not bad. And like I said, the gameplay is good, and that's really all the game has going for it. It's a simple premise that was executed rather well. It's a small game, and that's it. That's all there was to it. Whereas our game has a lot of passion and artsiness combined with like dedication to quality. That's kind of just all wrapped in one. That we being the underdogs, we really fight and really push to make an awesome game that justifies people being like, well, I've never heard of them. You know, it's like, but like you should buy it anyway because we're trying so hard to overcome that fact and to like prove to you that we have a game that's like as good as any other, or if not better, which is kind of necessary, unfortunately, for indie game developers to really stand out. And fortunately, in contrast with Etrian Mystery Dungeon, our game is not confined to the 3DS. I think part of why that game did so poorly was that it was a run-of-the-mill 3DS game, and it came out on no other platform, so it set itself up to be overshadowed by other 3DS games during a period where the 3DS was overflowing with new releases. Number 2, Dream Prison Wanderer was originally referred to as Project Dreamwalker, and the reason this is that developers very commonly use code names that are started with the word project because it's like, this is the name of the project, so it's Project X. Before they settle on a name, because settling on a name is important, and it's hard to do until you are very deep into development where you have all the facts and you know your game very intimately, where you can accurately sum it up in a way that it's not going to change and the name is going to stick. If you didn't know that, that's what happens in game development. So Project Dreamwalker is the same as Dream Prison Wanderer. Number 3, in the second newsletter, I said that Balthazar has both aura bending, like Lucario the Pokemon, to give you a point of reference, but also a shield that he characteristically carries around with him, much like how Captain America has a shield that he's known for. And so too does the main character of our game. At the time that was true, but then we revised the concept many months later so that very succinctly and very elegantly we combined the two things into one, and now his aura bending is very weak and very limited and very specific. It allows him to defend himself in a way that resembles the function of a shield. In effect, he has a magical ability to summon a shield out of nowhere. Using a very simple button press consumes your turn. And in that way, it's actually a very simple mechanic, but it relies more so on the exterior world and how you use your shield in a very dynamic way as your character progresses, but also as you defend yourself against ever-changing situations. And we felt like is a way to really simplify the controls, but also to still have an interesting character in a unique situation throughout the game. Number 4, in that same second issue, I claimed that the player will be able to do a lot of cool surreal stuff to really emphasize and really be epic about the fact that the player is stuck in a dream world. We wanted to really hammer home the idea that you're in a dream. You know, it's not just like window dressing or something that's mentioned now and then. It's like it's something that we really want the players to consciously like feel all the time. That like it's, you don't have to be told that you're in a dream, you feel it. And one of the ways we wanted to do that was by having the character walk on walls, kind of like the dimension that Giratina lives in, the legendary Pokemon from Pokemon Platinum. The negative world, it's kind of like a void-like space where platforms you could walk on a surface, but it wasn't always the same gravity as a different surface over there, like in Mario Galaxy where the different planets have different gravity. So we wanted to do something like that with our mystery dungeon, something that's never been done before. But we ultimately realized that it would be very difficult to program that, and so it seemed like a natural thing to cut to make development quicker and to make development less risky with new frontiers. And there's some other surreal ideas that we might cut. It's unlikely that going through a door a second time will take you to a new area altogether. It wouldn't be as hard to program that, but it seems like an idea that it could have problems, and it could actually be very different from what we envisioned as the game these days and how we want the player to constantly be heading towards the exit rather than just going through a revolving door and staying in the same floor for too long. So number 5 comes from issue number 4, in which we talked about AI behavior in general. At this point, we had started thinking about the details of the game and how we wanted that to be specifically. But something that we might have gotten wrong, and it's hard to say at this point, is that the AI is not going to be as human-like and as complex as we originally hoped for. It turned out to be very superfluous and different from what is at the core of what we're attempting to do with this game. The AI in nearly every mystery dungeon has been extremely simple, and that has not only been something easy for developers, something that they don't have to worry about or to put too much focus into, but it's also something that players have come to expect and to appreciate in its own way, that a simple AI is easier to understand and to outmaneuver in a way that feels satisfying because you feel like you're solving a puzzle, or that you feel like you have some sort of control over the situation, which is very important even in a horror game, that you feel like keep it together, that you can get your way out of this in one piece. We also felt like a lot of these things that we wanted to give the AI was just totally and utterly unrelated to anything that was important about the game. For one example is that enemies would have this behavior where they would follow one another, and that would change the gameplay a little bit because then you would have to fight 2 enemies instead of 1. But it was also extremely unnecessary. It was something that had nothing to do with the horror themes, nothing to do with the protagonist's character arc, nothing to do with anything that's important whatsoever. It was just one of those neat little ideas that would, hey, wouldn't it be cool if this was in the game? And I feel more so now than ever before that games are like artworks, in that they have to have a very tight and clear focus, because that's really the best way to get a message across, is that if there's too many things going on, then not enough players are going to really fully understand what the game developers are most trying to say, what they find most important to communicate. That gets lost too much. Even just getting lost a little bit was way too much, and it's so hyper important that games have incredible focus. It's not something I understood when I was younger, because I wanted games to be these epic, amazing things, but I didn't realize that games are kind of like a thought bubble. Games are a focus, an exploration of something specific. Otherwise, a game is boundless and indistinguishable from one another. And I think that wouldn't make any sense. And I kind of look at games like I would a novella, or like I said, a work of art, and that I feel like it's very important that games have that nature to them. In the 6th issue of the newsletter, I said that Trevor had been fired from the team, and that development had been continuing without him, doing really well. As a matter of fact, despite the fact that he was gone, the team was significantly smaller as a result. For some context, he was long gone from the team by this point, and I felt like I needed to wait before I made this announcement, because it was really bad news, and I didn't want to tell bad news if it wasn't important. You know, if he was rehired just days later, then it would be as if it never happened at all, and it would not have been news because it was just a very small squabble. But this turned out to be a huge deal. He was fired for well over a month, and we just didn't talk. And it seemed at the time like it was a very permanent change, and that was finally time to talk to you guys about that. It was correct at the time, like he really was off the team. But then, ironically, just days after I wrote that and released that issue, he approached me saying like, hey man, I had made a massive mistake. I am so sorry. Please forgive me. We would be better together. Like if I really apply myself, if we really work together and try to cooperate, we can do great things together. Like, please hire me back. Trevor was different, and he still is different in that he is very reciprocal about being a great friend, and trusted him. And because we're friends, I don't regret firing him, and yet I don't regret hiring him when I did. I felt like both things made our bond stronger and made us better coworkers in the end. It's weird to say that I'm really glad that it all happened the way that it did. I have nothing negative to say about the experience. It didn't slow anything down. It worked out in the end completely. And so there you have it. Those are the 6 errors. So thank you for watching. If you are not subscribed to this YouTube channel, I recommend you do so because it would allow you to keep up with very personal information about the game that we're making and us. These videos will give you a chance to have a friendly and informative experience learning about game development and also our game. Also, we have the newsletter that I've been talking about this whole video, and if you're not subscribed to that newsletter, it's free. There's an issue at least once a month, sometimes more than that, with the exception of December, because that is the holidays and we don't work very hard in December for obvious reasons. So please subscribe to that. I mean, it's in your best interest. You're getting free content to make you feel good about, like, to remind you why games are awesome, because our game is awesome and you should want to read about how awesome it is. Get on the hype train. It's going to be fun. Subscribe to our newsletter and read all about it. I'll see you then.